Watched this movement unfold over the past 15 years. I've seen this dramatic shift in the state of the art. 15 years ago, a major company could announce that it was banishing polystyrene foam coffee cups from its corporate cafeteria and make the Wall Street Journal or CNN. That was news. Today, of course, companies are going well beyond that, and leading-edge companies are literally reinventing themselves, creating new products, new services, even new business models that harness environmental thinking. This is truly a new way of doing business.
One of my favorite examples has to do with a relationship that DuPont has with Ford. Now, DuPont has a paint division. They sell paint to Ford and lots of other companies to paint cars. That's not new. They've been doing that for years. And the relationship is probably pretty much what you would imagine. The more paint they sell, the more money they make. Problem was that a lot of that paint wasn't ending up in the car. It was going into overspray, or ending up in wastewater. And it was the classic definition of pollution. If you're in business, when you look at it, pretty much, pollution represents something that you bought but couldn't sell and had to pay to get rid of. That's what this paint was. Ford had bought the paint. It had no value to the customer, had no value to Ford at all. It ended up being a liability. They had to take the stuff, they had to manifest it in certain ways, ship it off as a hazardous waste, and it cost them money. They paid for it twice, to buy it and then to get rid of it. So Ford and DuPont got together, and they looked at the relationship, and they began to understand that what Ford wanted from DuPont wasn't so much a product, paint, but a service, painted cars. They reorganized their business relationship. Now DuPont gets paid not based on how much paint they sell, but on how many cars get painted. So you can start to see the implications of this. They have 30 full-time DuPont employees sitting there in Ford plants, making sure those nozzles are adjusted and those capture devices are in place, making sure that they paint the most amount of cars with the least amount of paint.
In the past, the environment inside companies has been the domain of the engineers and the lawyers and the marketing folks. But true leadership companies are driving it much deeper into their organizations. Procurement, R&D, product design, even sales and marketing. That's where the environment stops being a cost center and starts to become a source of creativity and innovation, and ultimately of productivity and profits. I think there are a few companies in every sector who are going to gain competitive advantage from this type of thinking.
One final story that just shows how easy this stuff isn't. And it has to do with a company that I know you all know, because they're in your sector, Patagonia. A number of years ago, Patagonia was one of many companies that decided to put out a product that had buttons made from tagua nuts. The tagua nut grows in the rainforest, and it has a actually very hard shell that if you slice it and drill it and dye it and buff it and dye it, it looks indistinguishable in some cases from the polyester buttons that most of us have on our shirts. And the object here was simply that for Patagonia and a number of other companies did similar kinds of things, was to demonstrate that the rainforest was a viable economic entity, living as a living thing rather than being cut down for timber or grazing or agriculture. So Patagonia did the R&D on these tagua nut button shirts, and that involved something that they internally called a killer wash, which was washer to dryer, washer to dryer, washer to dryer 50 times to see how they'd stand up. And sure enough, they did, so they ramped up and rolled it out, and with great fanfare, sold a hell of a lot of tagua nut button shirts. Except that in a few weeks later, the shirts started coming back with broken buttons. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of broken buttons started coming back. What happened? Well, it turns out that in the rainforest, the tagua nut is genetically programmed after a hot, harsh rain followed by the hot sun, that it breaks open and spills its seed. That's how it reproduces. And it turns out that in the real world of people doing their laundry, that folks don't often go washer to dryer, that they do the wash at night and then they get caught up with ER or the kids or the net, and it sits there. In the morning they put it in the dryer. So here you have the button soaking up the hot rain from the washer and then soaking it up overnight, and then the hot sun from the dryer. And these things are just doing what comes naturally. wasn't a critical thing for Patagonia, but I think that they replaced it and they came out whole on the thing, and I think that they've survived clearly their reputation. But the lesson here is pretty simple. That when you think about business and the environment, you have to look at the laws of the government, of course. You have to obey the laws of the marketplace. But you have to obey the laws of nature. And that includes what may be the hardest nut to crack, which is human nature.
I think there's a critical need to help companies understand the challenges and opportunities of being a more environmentally conscious company. In my books and newsletters, websites, and consulting, I try to help them understand how the conversation is changing inside leadership companies. I show how companies have succeeded, and some haven't, in trying to address the needs of today's customers and employees, investors and activists, while staying focused on the business of the day. It's by no means easy, but a growing number of companies are showing that it can be done. That's what I try and share with my audiences.
Create opportunities that value people and profits and the planet. It's going to be good for Nike. It's going to be good for its communities and its customers, for all of you, and for everyone.